If you're listening to this late at night, when the world is quiet and your thoughts won't slow down, then stay right here. Tonight's stories are not meant to scare you awake. They are meant to gently unsettle your mind, just enough to pull your thoughts away from the day and guide you slowly into sleep.
There are no sudden noises here, no jump scares. Only quiet voices, dark stories told softly, and the sound of rain to carry you deeper and deeper into the night. Close your eyes if you feel safe to do so. Let your breathing slow down. With every breath you take, the room around you feels farther away. Tonight, you don't need to stay alert. These stories will unfold slowly, calmly, like a distant memory you're almost drifting through. You don't need to remember every word. Just listen and let the rain do the rest.
History 1. The House That Never Felt Empty. The house had been empty for years. At least, that's what everyone said. The sign outside had faded under the sun and rain. The windows were clean, but lifeless. No lights, no movement, no sign of anyone living inside. When I told people I was moving in, the reactions were always the same. A pause, a glance away, and then a quiet warning. Not spoken with fear, but with a seriousness that felt heavier than panic. They didn't tell me stories of screams or shadows. They didn't mention ghosts or footsteps in the night. Instead, they said something far stranger. They said the house never made noise. No creaking floors, no settling walls, no whispers carried by the wind. It was too quiet, as if it didn't want to be heard, as if it was always listening. The first night inside felt ordinary. The air was still, the rooms were empty, and the rain outside tapped gently against the windows. I lay in bed, staring up at the dark ceiling, listening to the steady rhythm of the rain, waiting for something to happen. But nothing ever did. No footsteps, no sounds, no movement, and that silence felt deliberate. As the nights passed, I began to notice small things, not changes, just absences. The air in the room felt heavier at night, not cold, not warm, just full, as if the space was already occupied. I would lie perfectly still, eyes closed, breathing slow, feeling something else in the room, not moving, not breathing, not touching, just present. It never stood beside the bed, never leaned close, never reached out. It simply existed, and somehow that was worse. Some nights I would wake suddenly, not from a noise, but from the feeling of being noticed, as if something had become aware of me and decided to remain still. I never saw it, never heard it, never felt its touch, but I felt its patience. Night after night, it stayed exactly where it was, watching, listening, waiting. The rain continued to fall outside, softly, endlessly, and eventually, so did my thoughts.
His story 2, Voices Beneath the Rain. I used to walk home every night through the same street. It wasn't a long walk, just a quiet stretch of road lined with old trees, dim street lights, and empty sidewalks. The rain always followed me there. Not heavy, not violent, just a steady, patient rain, falling softly, as if it had nowhere else to be. I knew every step of that street, every crack in the pavement, every shadow cast by the lights above. That's why I noticed it so quickly. One night, as the rain fell around me, I realized the footsteps behind me weren't mine. At first, I told myself it was nothing, an echo, rain hitting the ground at the wrong angle. But the sound was too precise. Each step landed exactly when mine did, not a moment sooner, not a moment later. They never got closer. They never fell behind. They stayed perfectly in rhythm, as if someone was walking inside my shadow. I slowed my pace. The footsteps slowed too. I sped up. They followed instantly, without effort, without breath. The rain continued to fall, blurring the edges of the world around me.
Streetlights stretched longer, shadows deepened, and the sound behind me remained calm, unrushed, certain. When I finally stopped walking, the footsteps stopped too. Not a second later, not with hesitation, immediately. The rain filled the silence that followed, soft, endless, surrounding me from every direction. And then, beneath the sound of the rain, I heard breathing. Not hurried, not aggressive. Calm, slow, patient, as if whatever stood behind me had all the time in the world. I didn't turn around. I didn't run. I stood there listening as the rain fell and the breathing remained exactly where it was, waiting. Eventually, without warning, the sound faded. The breathing dissolved into the rain. The footsteps never returned. I walked the rest of the way home alone. But even now, on quiet nights, when rain taps softly against the window, I still walk a little faster.
History 3, A Room with No Corners. Part 1, The Arrival. The first thing Daniel noticed when he stepped into the room was that he couldn't find the walls. Not because the room was dark. It wasn't. There was light, soft, pale, the color of old cream, coming from somewhere he couldn't quite identify. Not from above, not from the sides, just from everywhere and from nowhere at the same time. He had found the place through an ad, one of those quiet little listings buried at the bottom of a housing website, the kind most people scroll past without reading. Room for rent, long stay preferred, peaceful, very peaceful. No photos, just an address and a name, Mrs. Albright. The building itself was ordinary enough, a narrow townhouse on a street he had never heard of, somewhere between downtown and the edge of the city, in that gray zone where neighborhoods stop having names. He had taken 2 buses and walked for 11 minutes, and he still wasn't entirely sure how he had gotten there. Mrs. Albright had met him at the door. She was a small woman, older, with white hair pinned back and eyes the color of still water. She didn't smile exactly, but her face was kind, calm in a way that felt almost physical, like warmth coming off a radiator. She had led him upstairs without saying much. 3rd floor, end of the hallway. The door was wooden, pale, with a small brass handle that was slightly too large for it. "It's very quiet," she had said. "People sleep well here." And then she had left him standing in the doorway.
Daniel stepped inside. The room was not large, or perhaps it was. That was the first strange thing. He genuinely couldn't tell. When he looked directly at any part of it, it seemed like a normal size, maybe 4 meters across, maybe 5. A simple room with a bed, a small wooden table, a window that looked out onto a courtyard filled with motionless gray trees. But when he stopped looking directly at anything, when he let his eyes go soft and unfocused, the way you do sometimes just before sleep, the room seemed to breathe outward. The edges softened, the space expanded slowly, like a long exhale. He blinked. The room was normal again. He set his bag down on the floor. The floor was wooden, pale, smooth, not polished, just worn, the way old floors get when many quiet feet have walked across them over many quiet years. It felt solid under his shoes, real, grounded. He sat on the edge of the bed. The mattress was soft, softer than he expected. He pressed one hand into it and felt it give, slowly, evenly, like something that had been waiting a long time to be used. He looked around for the corners of the room. This was when he noticed. There were no corners. Not in any dramatic way, not like the walls had been removed or the architecture was impossible. It was subtler than that. The walls met each other in gentle curves, so gentle you almost didn't see it, so gradual that your eye passed over them naturally, the way your eye passes over the curve of a hill against a sky, not registering it as unusual, because the mind files it under landscape, under natural, under normal. But they were curved, all of them. Every place where a wall should have met another wall in a clean, right-angled corner. Instead, there was a soft bend, a gentle arc, like the inside of an eggshell, like the inside of a held breath. Daniel stood up and walked to the nearest wall. He ran his fingers along the place where it met the adjacent wall. Yes, a curve, smooth plaster, slightly cool, bending so softly that a person could look at it for a full minute without being certain it wasn't a corner at all. He checked the floor where it met the wall. Same thing, a slow, soft transition, no harsh angle, just a gentle slope, like a river meeting a bank. He looked up, the ceiling too, where it met the walls, the same arc, the same gentle, unbroken curve. He was inside a room with no corners, and somehow he felt completely calm. Part 2. The Deepening. He unpacked slowly that first evening. He didn't have much. A bag of clothes, a few books, a small lamp he never ended up plugging in because the existing light in the room was already perfect. That same soft, sourceless glow. Not bright enough to read by comfortably, but not dim enough to feel oppressive. Just enough, just right. He had moved cities for work, a new job, a new start, the kind of fresh chapter that sounds cleaner in theory than it ever feels in practice. He was tired in that deep way, not from lack of sleep, but from too many years of a certain kind of living, too many sharp edges,
too many corners. He thought of that as he lay down on the bed. Too many corners. He lay on his back and looked up at the ceiling and let his eyes unfocus again, the way he had earlier. And again, slowly, the room seemed to expand. The walls drifted gently outward. The ceiling rose softly, like a chest rising on an inhale. The pale light spread itself more thinly across a larger and larger space, and yet it never dimmed. It just became wider, more diffuse, more even. He could feel it in his body, a loosening, like something in his chest unknotting, like a fist very slowly opening. He had not expected to sleep that night. He never slept well in new places. His body was a careful, suspicious thing, always cataloging new environments, listening for threats, measuring distances to exits. He had assumed he would lie awake for hours. Instead, he was asleep within minutes. He didn't dream, or if he did, he didn't remember. There was just sleep, deep, even, textureless, like sinking into warm water, like being somewhere that had no edges.
He woke to gray morning light coming through the courtyard window. The trees outside were still. No wind, no birds, just the trees and the pale sky, and the soft sound of rain beginning somewhere nearby, not falling on the window, not quite, but close. The sound of rain on leaves, somewhere just out of sight. He lay in bed for a long time, not wanting to move. This was unusual for him. Normally, mornings were effortful. His mind would start cataloging the day before he was fully awake. The meetings, the unread messages, the small anxious inventory of everything undone. But that morning, in that room, his mind was quiet, still, like a room with no corners of its own. He stared at the ceiling. The curve where the ceiling met the wall above him was so soft it looked almost like a horizon, like lying on your back in a field and looking at the line where sky meets land, that gentle breathing boundary that isn't really a line at all, just a place where one thing becomes another. He thought about how much of his life had been built around corners, around sharp angles, around the right angles of rooms, of schedules, of plans that had hard edges and clear termination points. Every room he had ever lived in had corners. You could see them from any point in the space. You could orient yourself by them. They told you where you were. They told you where the room ended. Without them, the room felt like it could go on forever. And oddly, he didn't mind. Part 3. The Quiet Weeks. He stayed. He had planned to find something more permanent eventually, a proper apartment, a lease, something with his name on a contract. But the days passed in that room with a strange liquid ease, each one sliding into the next without the usual friction, and he kept not leaving. The job was fine. He took the bus each morning and came back each evening, and the room was always the same pale light, same soft floor, same curved walls curving gently away from each other in every direction. He started sleeping better than he ever had in his life. Not just longer, differently. He slept like a person without a past, like a person who had set something down and walked away from it and forgotten what it was called. He slept like water in a bowl, completely, evenly, touching every surface of the vessel with perfect, undivided contact. He told a colleague about the room once, just offhandedly over lunch. "It's a strange place," he said. "No corners. The walls are all curved. You can't find where one thing ends and another begins." His colleague had looked at him strangely. "Doesn't that bother you?" she'd said, "not knowing where things end?" He had thought about it, really thought about it. "No," he'd said, "honestly, it doesn't."
Some nights he would lie awake for a little while before sleep came, and he would let his eyes go soft, and the room would expand, and he would try to find the edge of it. He never could. Not in a frightening way, not like being lost, more like the way you can't find the edge of sleep itself, the exact moment between awake and not awake. You can chase it, but you can never catch it, because the moment you are aware of being at the edge, you are still on the waking side of it. The edge retreats. The distance between you and sleep always stays the same. The room was like that. He would let his gaze drift to the far wall, and the far wall would seem to be just a little farther away than it had been. Not alarmingly, just slightly, the way a familiar street looks longer on a gray afternoon. He would shift his gaze, and the wall would return to its normal distance, and he would feel his body relax another degree into the mattress. He began to think the room knew what it was doing.
Mrs. Albright knocked one evening in the third week. She stood in the doorway with a small plate of something, biscuits or crackers, he wasn't sure, and looked at him with those still water eyes. "How are you sleeping?" she asked. "Very well," he said. She nodded, as if this was the answer she had expected, as if this was the only answer anyone ever gave her about this room. "It was built this way on purpose," she said. She set the plate on the small table. "My husband's grandfather, he was an architect. He believed that corners accumulate things, tension, memory, the kind of feeling that follows you from room to room." She paused. "He thought that if you removed the corners, there would be nowhere for those things to collect." Daniel looked around the room, the soft curves, the gentle arcs where wall met wall, where floor met wall, where wall breathed into ceiling. "Did it work?" he asked. Mrs. Albright considered this for a moment. "You're sleeping well," she said, and she left. Part 4. The Infinite Middle. There were nights when the room got very big. Not in a way he could prove, or measure, or explain to anyone. But there were nights, late nights after rain, when the house was completely silent, when he would wake from a deep sleep and lie in the darkness and feel the walls pulling back, slowly, evenly, the room breathing outward on a long, slow exhale. He would lie still and let it happen. The ceiling would rise gently like a tide going out. The floor would feel like it extended in every direction, far beyond what he could see or feel or reach. The bed would become a small, warm island in a very large, very quiet sea. And he would feel fine, better than fine. He would feel the way you feel sometimes in the deepest part of a dream, held, suspended, completely safe in a space that has no edges, and therefore no end, and therefore nowhere to fall out of. He was in the middle of something infinite, and the middle of something infinite is the safest place in the world, because in the middle of something infinite you are equally far from every edge. You cannot fall. You cannot be pushed to a boundary. There is no corner waiting to catch you, no angle to snag on, no hard termination point where the room says, "Here, this is where you end." He would lie there in the soft, expanding dark and breathe, in, out. The room would breathe with him.
He thought sometimes about what Mrs. Albright's husband's grandfather had understood, that we carry our tensions in the corners of things, in the right angles, in the hard meetings of surfaces. The corner of a room is where two walls run out of room to be themselves and are forced together abruptly at 90 degrees. There is something final about a corner, something trapped. But a curve has no such finality. A curve just continues. It turns, yes, it bends, but it never stops. It never says, this is the end, this is the wall, this is where things terminate. It just keeps going in its slow arc, always in motion, never arriving at a hard stop. He thought this was why he slept. He had spent so many years sleeping in rooms full of corners, rooms that told him, silently from every angle, that there were edges, that there were limits, that space had walls, and walls had ends, and ends were real. This room told him something different. This room said, go on, keep going. There is more space than you can imagine, and it is all yours, and none of it will cut you. Part 5. The Long Quiet. By the end of the first month, he had stopped looking for the corners, not because he had given up or forgotten they weren't there, but because it no longer seemed important. The room was what it was. The curves were what they were. He had stopped needing to locate himself by the hard geometry of the space. He knew where he was. He was in the middle. He was in the soft, slow, infinite middle of a room that had decided long ago that edges were optional. The rain came back in the second month. Steady October rain that fell for days without pausing, darkening the courtyard stones, making the gray trees outside his window look like they were slowly becoming part of the sky. He would lie in bed on those mornings, later than he should, but the job was understanding, the work was quiet, the commute was short, and listen to the rain. Rain has no corners either. It falls in a continuous curving descent, each drop a small arc from cloud to earth, from up to down, from sky to ground. There is no hard angle in any of it, just the long, soft, unbroken fall. He would lie there and let the sound of it fill the room. The pale walls absorbed the sound the way they absorb the light, evenly, completely, without reflection or echo. The rain would fall outside, and somehow, inside, it would become something softer, more diffuse, less like the percussion of water on stone, and more like the sound of something breathing, very slowly, very deeply, very close. He would close his eyes. The room would expand. He would breathe.
Sometimes, in that half space before sleep, he would imagine he could see the walls still curving, even with his eyes closed, could feel the room extending itself, slowly, in all directions, making more and more space, not filling it with anything, not rushing to fill it with anything, just making it, opening it. More space, and more, and more, until the room had no edges he could find, and his body had no tension he could locate, and the boundary between himself and the dark and the soft and the quiet became the same kind of gentle curve as the walls, bending slowly into something else, not disappearing, just continuing. He never left, not that month, and not the month after. The lease he had meant to sign somewhere else remained unsigned,
The apartment viewings he had scheduled were quietly canceled. His life somehow reorganized itself around the room, not violently, not abruptly, just slowly, in the way that water reorganizes itself around a stone, flowing, adjusting, finding its own level. He worked. He ate. He walked sometimes in the evenings through the nameless neighborhood, under the gray trees and the quiet streetlights. And then he came back, and the room was waiting, always the same, always pale and soft and gently curved, with its sourceless light and its impossible, comfortable sense of space, always larger than it had any right to be, always quieter, always stiller, always ready for him to lie down and close his eyes and let his body follow the slow curve of the room out into the long, soft, edgeless dark.
Epilogue. The room remembers. The last thing Daniel would think, each night before sleep finally came, was that he understood now why this room had been built. Not as an architectural curiosity, not as an experiment, not as anything eccentric or unusual or strange, but as a kindness. Someone had understood a long time ago that the hardest thing about being human is all the sharp edges, the places where things end, the corners where you feel yourself trapped or small or running out of room. And that person had built a room with none. A room that said gently, without words, every single night, "There is more space than you think. There is always more space. You are not at the edge. You are in the middle. You are safe. Go to sleep." And so he did. And so can you.